morning, everyone. I was here yesterday, and I must say this is my first experience of being in such a gathering, and I am super inspired. The SDGs are by nature boring, so please bear with me. And I tried to read it to one of the ladies I mentored yesterday. I tried to read what I was going to say, and she said, "But it's so boring. It's so UN language. Just tell a story." So I was like, how do I talk about the SDGs without just reading this? So I spent the whole evening trying to come up with something, and I failed. So I'm sorry. I'm going to have to look at this and read it. So just bear with me. I'm not going to take 20 minutes. It doesn't need that long. There is, of course, a lot to say for the SDGs. These are what we call Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with them, so I will not bother with them. There are 17 goals, and all of them are interdependent and are supposed to lead to the other being fulfilled. And for our purposes, we are looking at Goal 5, which is on gender equality. But of course, gender equality cannot be achieved if we don't end zero hunger, if we don't have access to education for all girls, if we don't have strong institutions and rule of law. So all the other SDGs cannot be achieved unless you achieve Goal 5, and this is recognized in the preamble to it. Many of the UN institutions are led with different goals, and our office, the Human Rights, we are leading on Goal 16, which looks at strong institutions, rule of law, peace, and security. And we know we cannot, as I said, achieve sustainable peace if women are not part of the solution. Now, the goals were adopted in 2015, and that was to replace the MDGs. Those who are familiar with it. So we're already a third way through, because it's a 15-year agenda. So when we say Agenda 2030, it means by 2030 we are supposed to have achieved the goals, or at least made substantial progress towards achieving it. There has been some progress so far since we're almost at the end of the 4 years. And there are good news. There are more women. With data shows us there are more women living above the poverty line globally. And that includes the global north. This is good news. The data talks about more people, but of course we know proportionally women everywhere, in every society, in every community, are more likely to be the ones living under the poverty line. There are also globally less women dying, giving birth, doing what is supposed to be natural. So this is a good thing. But where we have seen it's been really successful, and the topic of our discussions today, is in financial inclusion. And this is debatable. We talk about microfinancing. This is not an accepted truism for everybody that microfinancing is a good thing. In some contexts, there are challenges, and we talk about unintended consequences. But for today, we are going to talk about the positive side of microfinancing. And later in the bilaterals, if there are any in the discussion, you can talk about some of the challenges. And since I've been instructed to tell a story, I'm going to read a story about a couple of stories very quickly about how microfinancing have helped women. So we start with one case in the Philippines. And I'm going to read it. And if Dao Shan struggled to feed her family and educate her 2 daughters, she did everything she could to piece together a livelihood, weaving baskets, working as casual laborer, and even raising pigs. But it was never enough. At one point, she had to pawn her 3-acre parcel of land, which she inherited from her husband, which was very difficult for her to secure in the first place, being a woman and having issues with inheritance rights. But then a microfinance program came to her village, led by the UNDP. And she made a smart decision, and she enrolled. Not every woman in the village did. Soon, she was eligible for borrowing 40,000 kyats. This is a very small amount in comparison to Europe, which was enough to buy 40 bundles of plant fiber to weave more baskets. Each year, for 5 consecutive years, she continued to borrow small sums, plowing them back into her business, which grew steadily. By the 5th year, she had turned enough of a profit to redeem the family land and purchase 2 additional acres, while repaying all of her loans. Her 2 daughters are now flourishing in school, which she can now easily afford. Because, of course, before she couldn't afford. In another story, another woman, she used to survive by plucking weeds and leaves and other seasonal jobs. She and her husband lived in a shed with a roof made of leaves that offered little protection from the elements. Again, a series of small loans allowed her to purchase a cow and develop a milking business, providing enough income for a comfortable home. Microfinance, small as it is, has transformed their lives. Now the bad news. But where do we start? There are not that many bad news. As I said, there are some indicators. The SDGs, there are goals, and then they have targets, and then they have indicators. So the indicators on gender equality, which is under Goal 5, are progressing. We talked about less women dying in childbirth. We talked about less people living in slums. Most of them would have been women. We also know there are now more girls in school. And practices that happen in the global south, but we know happens also in the north because of movement, migration. Practices such as harmful practices such as child marriage and FGM are thankfully on the reduction. But there are some, we still see there are little progress on some structural issues or root causes of discrimination or gender inequality. We talked about harmful stereotypes. We still see that every day in the media and in our homes and in our communities. What is the role of men? What is the role of women? Stereotypes that are harmful both to women and to men, or to girls and to boys. There are still a lot of challenges on sexual and reproductive health and rights, on what autonomy women have over her body, and this is an issue we see even in the US every day. And it's a challenge in many of the countries we are working with. Also, low levels of political participation is common, and then you talk about unpaid work. In 90 countries, and this is not all in the South, women devote on average 3 times more hours to unpaid work and domestic work than men. And these are also women in full-time jobs. What does that mean? When you spend so much time, it limits your hours you can do for paid work, your access to education and to leisure. And obviously, by doing so, it reinforces what we have spoken about there, harmful stereotypes and social economic disadvantages. Globally, women continue to be underrepresented at all levels of political participation. And while women represent 39% of world employment, only 27% are in managerial positions. These are data from 2018. And I think we all agree, evidence time and time shows again that if you integrate women and girls in all aspects of every issue, not just economic, what we are talking about today, you're going to make more progress. And it's going to be faster. So we really now going forward, we know from next year, 2020, the UN, we are looking at acceleration of the SDGs because there are only 10 years left and we're not going to meet the targets in 10 years. Many of the things in there. So there's a whole focus on how do we speed up acceleration and transformation. There are also discussions around developing new matrix, looking at which businesses are now incorporating gender and diversity into their business models, which ones have proactive policies to share. So it's about partnership and sharing of good practices, and more importantly, which approaches have not delivered results for women in the past, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. I think yesterday in the outbreak session, on diversity and inclusion, Marguerite spoke about how talking in this bubble is not helpful. We have to look at what is also happening in the broader context, both at the political stage, and this is also, of course, critically important, especially for the SDG. It's a government-led agenda, but in it, there are roles for all of us, the private sector and for individuals. So we need political leadership at the highest level to take it forward. We recommend at least for Goal 5, there are 2 critical steps that we need to take going forward for impact. The care economy, and engaging with men in the home to address the dual role of care and work that falls on women. We also need to look at the labor market transformations and high growth sectors. So I think this is really important. We talk about digital economy, and this is not an issue in the global north, but also in the south. We are looking at the digital economy and its impact on gender and what role it can do to promote gender equality. Of course, it goes without saying, the work that's been done by states and partners needs to be stronger, smarter, and far more reaching. And I am coming from human rights, so it must include justice, equality, inclusion, and empowerment. In other words, a rights-based approach, both in the private sector and in the public sector. This is a very brief summary of where we are starting from and where we are and how we can focus our efforts to really bend the curve going forward. Thank you for listening. Yeah, of course.
If I put you back on stage with this microphone, I'm just going to grab one from the audience.
Thank you. I was hoping to escape, but if you must insist.
Yep, I'm kind of sad I have to give it out to you because I've got a ton of questions myself. But as Mary Jane was the first to put her hand up, I'm thinking you might have a question.
I do.
All right, then.
At least I put my voice out there. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of this, and it was absolutely not boring. You mentioned very briefly that there's a role for all of us in this. And how do you see that role?
Okay. I think, of course, it's on the individual level, then in our communities, and then in where we are working. And I think for me personally, what I see every day is really looking at stereotypes and my behavior as well. So now I have a daughter, and although I'm supposed to be a gender specialist, I have been known to pick pink. And so when she's very boisterous, we have guests, and sometimes she's all over the place. And I have been known to say, but girls are not supposed to behave like this. But I have been checking it. So I think the question is to know what are your biasness and to be able to check it. And I have been called on it by others going, but you work on women's rights, what are you saying? Let her run. So individually, I think in our own, we start from the micro level, no? In our own homes, what we are doing, how we interact with our kids, with our family. Then we go to the community, how we go to work every day, and what perception we do. And I think I loved what we started with, where you talked about, and I haven't heard that quote, so I'm going to be using it, that when you use a candle to light one, it doesn't put out the other. And I think we can also facilitate how we work with women. So in my office, I have colleagues, I have junior colleagues who are women, and sometimes they will come and say, so for instance, I'm in Ethiopia. So they just had an Ethiopian New Year, which is different from everybody else. They're 6 years behind us. They have your own calendar. I love being there. I'm 6 years younger. So just last week, she came in, tomorrow it's not an official UN holiday. Tomorrow is the Ethiopian New Year. I have 2 kids, and I have no maid, so I need to go home and prepare. So initially, my reaction was like, then get a maid, because I'm still here. Then I thought, no, why? She needs to go home, and it's only a day. So I went back, and I was saying, Sabina, of course you can leave anytime. Then you have people coming and saying funerals, because the obligations on them is very different from me living in Ethiopia with just a very small family. And then when you have extended family, they expect, it doesn't matter you're in full-time work. You have to come home to do the cooking, because it's the new year. And somebody dies, you have to go home for the funeral and prepare. So you have to work our environments have to adapt to the realities of women and the context that we are working in. I think it helps.